Hello, my name is Janice B. Gordon, and this is Scale Your Sales Podcast. Welcome to Scale Your Sales Podcast, listed number 9 of 43 best podcasts for every sales professional. I am Janice B. Gordon, the customer growth expert, awarded RevTech strategist of 2024. In today's episode of Scale Your Sales Podcast, my guest talks about aligning people, processes, and technology in order to enhance the effectiveness of RevOps strategies within the B2B sales environment. He says you've got to focus on the customer and remove all the friction in the processes to enable them to make great decisions more quickly. It's also about realigning the sales stages to be customer focused, and that is having a value hypothesis and value alignment and value agreement. So you get greater impact around that alignment and they recognize the impact. He quoted some incredible stats about how buyers buy before sellers are able to reach them. So you've got to start early enough in conveying your value to them. They've got to know what they're going to get before they contact you. My next guest is the CRO of Carabiner Group. As part of SBI Growth, an advisor and a fractional executive for several high-growth startups, where he utilizes his expertise in all things GMT and revenue ops. He is an active leader in multiple GTM communities and a recipient of the 2024 Modern Sales Leader Award from HubSpot. Welcome to Scale Your Sales Podcast, Cliff Simon.
Hi, nice to see you, Janice.
It's good to see you and talk to you. Now, the first thing I want to ask you is about alignment of people, processes, and technology. And how can you enhance the effectiveness of RevOps strategies within a B2B sales environment using that alignment process?
Yeah, I think everyone talks about those three sort of pillars very often. The difficulty there is getting all of them right in the right order and the right proportion, right? We all want to have the best people working for us. We want to have brilliant thinkers, excellent doers, people who can look at a challenge and critically evaluate it, break it into its distillate parts, conquer it, and put it all back together. But if you don't have the appropriate processes for that, if you're not actually tracking how that's happening and you're not putting that into an SOP of sorts, that's an ever living, evolving document, it becomes really difficult to do that at anything other than, a 1 to 25 person company, right? You have to be able to take that out into a set of processes to build out at scale. And then ultimately, those things need to be translated into technology. And if you don't have good processes, when you start automating things using technology, those workflows invariably break the company because what you're amplifying is nothing but garbage, right? It's unproven. So taking those processes, working through them manually, understanding the outcomes and the outputs of those processes. And once you've got them honed in and tuned, then going forward and building out technology to meet the need.
I think this is really interesting because, you start with aligning the people in that order first, and then the process, and then the technology. But it sounds very process and technology focused rather than people. You didn't talk much about making sure you've got the right people in the right seats, the skill set, because the thing is, even if you have a great process in place, unless you have the great people to use the process, we have SOPs, but you've got to have people that follow them. You've got to have people that are coachable. You've got to have kind of active listeners. So much hinges on the people.
I think in the earlier days, it's really important to have the generalist, right? Someone who can wear a bunch of hats, the Mike Rowe dirty jobs, the get things done person. And then as business continues to grow and evolve, all of those roles become specialized. So yes, you do need to start bringing in folks that are of the right ilk, the right capability, the right mindset for a specific role and task given where the company is. And that's only natural.
Yeah. So then how does that happen once that focus moves more to making sure that you have the right specialists in place that have the right capabilities and mindset? How do you choose those people? What mechanisms do you know? Because, being in the industry for such a long time, I meet sales leaders all the time. There isn't one of them that hasn't made a bad sales hire, and that can be costly to your bottom line, time, money, even losing customers. And we often are dipping from the same pool. So how do you guarantee that that's not going to happen?
There's no guarantees in life, right? Just death and taxes. But hire slow, fire quickly, right? If there's not the right fit, have that open conversation and let folks know. And maybe you don't have to move them outside of the company. Maybe there's still other avenues within the company for them. But I think it's really important that in the hiring process, you take the time to vet a very wide host of candidates that could all fit the criteria, that have the requisite experience and or the requisite capabilities, and put them through the process. I just went through this with a sales engineer hire. He starts tomorrow. So excited for it. Um, One of my top 2 picks for the role from the very beginning. He was the first person we interviewed, and we could have hired him on the spot. Like he was great, but we wanted to make sure that we were getting the absolute right person for the role. So we went through an entire process that took 2 months after that, knowing that we had this guy that we really liked. So I feel even stronger conviction having gone through that process, knowing that I've got the right person and having seen what was on the market. So yeah, I think it's incumbent on the company to make sure that they are taking the time, doing their due diligence. A lot of times people will say whatever they have to say to get a job, right? And you got to be wary of that. I think really good question and asking throughout the interview process. When I'm going through it, at least, I'm trying to get back down into core values, what drives a person, what intrinsically motivates them, and then what about the role is going to excite them? Is it the ability to learn, the ability to get career recognition or advancement, or for most folks, it's going to be the ability to earn, especially in a sales role. But all those things have to be at the right place for that person in their career and has to match up with what the company can promise them today and what there's a hope for in tomorrow.
I think this is really interesting because you said having seen what's on the market. So that kind of implies that there's a lot of perhaps crud that's out there, and you've got to kind of filter through. And then the other point that you made, that so much of sales success is intrinsic. So it's not about past performance, is not a predictor of future performance. So it's behaviors, it's intrinsic, it's mindset. Traditional recruiting very much focuses on performance, past performance, and skills, easily teachable. And so is there a mechanism that you use to identify those critical, important things that really do impact sales success for when you're hiring that individual?
Don't get me wrong, skills, very important. The less I have to teach you, the quicker your ramp, right? When it comes to past performance, it is the greatest indicator of future success, right? Things that have gone well in the past typically go well in the future. But things can change, people can evolve, people can learn. So I'm usually asking folks about what they're doing to better themselves. What outside learning are you doing? What books are you reading? What podcasts are you listening to? Even if it's outside of sales, right? Like, what are you doing that shows me that you as a human being are curious, interested, and trying to get better at something? And then I want to get to know them personally. I want to understand what intrinsically motivates them. Is it money? Maybe. But more likely it's security for their family, being able to provide for their family, paying the mortgage, right? They want to leave their kids off better than they had it, right? If you can get to those layers, I can start to understand the values that you have as a person. And now we can tie your values back to the company values, or more importantly, to our team's values, to make sure that we're always aligned and we're speaking the same language. Because if we can be open in our dialogue as a a manager and an employee, a coach, and someone that's coachable, then we can overcome a lot of different obstacles regardless of what comes up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's something I disagree in terms of past performance. There's lots of data to actually, you take somebody, you put them in a different culture, a different environment. There's so many things that are different that it isn't necessarily the case. In actual fact, the data says it's often not the case that your top performers in one industry or one sector or one company is going to be a top performer in another. Past performance is very much based on the past circumstances, which you're not going to replicate exactly. However, in terms of what intrinsically motivate them, what are their behaviors, these are the things they take with them, what limits them, limiting behaviors, all of these things you can change if you know about them, but they're the things that will go forward, regardless of the environment. If you've got certain limiting, your challenge when you're talking about money, your access decision makers, it doesn't matter if you move to a different environment, that's something internal. So there are ways of actually identifying those things so you don't have to wait 2 months. There are the only specific sales assessment that's got 2.6 million assessments that will identify those things that are intrinsic, because we know that that's the critical aspect of sales success. So I think it's certainly agree with you in coachability, but often you've got to identify, are they coachable?
100%, you got to find that out.
Yeah, excellent. All right, so let's talk a bit more about customer centricity in terms of a strategy. We know that the focus on sales previously used to be very much internally motivated, from inside out, whereas actually now there's got to be a sense of outside in. And so tell me more about how you ensure that your strategies are customer centric.
Well, let's start with the data, right? Sixth Sense just came out with a report over the summer. 70% of the buying journey happens before you ever talk to the customer ever talks to a salesperson now. I remember when Challenger first came out, I think it was like close to 50%, right? That number just keeps creeping up, right? They're more educated than ever. So 1, 2, 82% of the time, the buyer is initiating first contact, not the seller. And 84% of the time, the first person that the buyer talks to is the person they're buying from. So the game has changed. It is not about being the first to get to them with a cold email. It is about creating thought leadership and showing up in the places that your customers go to get help in order to be able to offer value before they ever enter a buying cycle, right? I'm a big winning by design guy, love Jocko. I speak a lot in value, a lot in impact. And for customers, we need to be able to show them that promised future impact while we're going through the education and awareness phases, right? We think about that too in the way that we do our own buying journey, right? I want it to be customer centric. It's not this linear process of stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 12, whatever you might have in your bloated CRM, that the customer actually lives through, right? So internally, we've switched over to something where there's a hypothesis around value. Both we and the customer believe that there is a potential for a value exchange to happen, them to get something from us and us to get something from them. Afterwards, have we actually aligned on that value? Does that even make sense? And we have a couple conversations, maybe it's discovery, maybe you've gone through a demo phase, but do you actually have alignment on the value that they're going to receive? After that, you can design the solution, and then you can go into the contracting, paper process, all of that. But all of it has to be hinged on where the customer believes they're actually going to be getting something that they're paying for. And do they think that that aligns to a fair market value for that particular product or service?
So explain the hypothesis. How do you get that in early enough? Bearing in mind, I love the stats that you quoted, Cliff. Bearing in mind the buyer reaches out to you, so they need to see that earlier on in their search. So explain that to me.
Yeah, the way that we did it was we went with a community-led approach, right? We were very present, both digitally and in person, with many of our buyers in the places that they go, right? Whether for us that was places like Pavilion, RevOps Co-op, WizOps, Sales Assembly. We host regular dinners to bring people together, not for us to sell, but for them to meet other people so that we can all build relationships with one another. Because invariably, they're going to recommend me not to somebody else at that table because they've already met, but to someone that's never heard of us before. And it's this incredible effect of these concentric circles, right, of influence. And that's what we're always trying to build out, the ability to help people understand where they can get help. And for us, it started off very simply as folks would have questions. We would come in and answer them, even if they had nothing to do with revenue operations, right? Strategy, comp design, whatever it might be. And that led out to folks always coming back and asking or remembering, right? It's a lot of give to give, and eventually something comes back. You know it does. But you have to lead with a human-centric mindset.
Love that. Love that. Lead with a human-centric mindset. So how do you choose the organizations that you work with based on, leading with a human-centric mindset? We might find organizations that are not so human-centric or customer-centric or buyer-centric. They've got old legacy systems in place. They're trying to align and negotiate. So how would you kind of start that process?
If I was a salesperson looking for a new role,
Well, if
or
you're working with a larger organization that has a
yeah,
legacy system and has traditional sales mindset models that are not so leading with value and purpose and customer centricity.
if I was at an organization like that and we weren't hitting our numbers, because I imagine that's going to be a difficult thing unless they have a massive channel motion. The questions I would be asking, like, well, what's the board asking us to do? What's our growth number this year? What's the EBITDA requirement? Where is our GRR at? Like, if we're not doing the things today that are allowing us to reach the targets that have been set, maybe it's time for a change. Let's start with some experimentation and see what we can do to align ourselves to this new buying persona, right? The largest buying population right now is millennials, right? We buy a little bit differently than Gen X did and than the boomers did. So driving that interpersonal relationship is really important. It's even more important for the Gen Zers and for Gen Alpha. So we need to start thinking about that now as businesses if we want to be able to continually evolve to the buying behaviors of the next generation. And for the generation that's now in the majority, even though, we're still, the majority of us, sub 45, we're the largest buying block. So how do you adjust? Because people in the B2B space want to buy the way that they do in their consumer lives. Right? How do you take away friction from a buying process? I don't want to talk to an SDR because I signed up for a demo on your website. I actually want to talk to an AE or someone technical that can answer my questions because I can figure out the rest of it by myself. Right? We're all fairly well-educated people. We've all done our research. We've gone on YouTube. We've gone on G2. Right? We've gone on the Slack channels and hunted around to see what people are talking about. So meet your buyers where they're at.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. I think you bring up a really interesting point. Often we all find that there's 4 generations of people within workforces, generational. Each of them react and buy and communicate very differently. So there's so many more challenges, not only in terms of the customers, but also within the workforce as well. So yeah, fantastic point there. So what one tried and tested strategy would you offer listeners and how to scale their sales?
How to scale your sales. Listen to the customer. I mean, I feel like I'm banging the same drum here, but they're going to be the ones to tell you. get a great feedback loop going from your CS team, understand what the pains are in market, understand what your competitors are doing that they don't like, understand the feature sets that you need to be building as a company so that you can go out and sell to a larger TAM or be more attractive to your existing one. And as a seller, you need to pick up on all the value and impact language that the customers are dropping on your gong recordings and pull that into your sales process. Like those are the stories, right? We're storytellers when you're in sales. You're telling someone a story of how someone else got value out of your product or service and how it had incredible impact on their business. If you can't do that, you're gonna have a uphill battle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you work with a lot of high growth startups. So what is the one commonality that you often find that they're missing in their GTM motion?
Oh, that's a great question. Because we work from companies, really early, call like 2, 3 million in revenue, and all the way up to companies doing billions. And there's this incredible through line that exists all the way across that spectrum, and it's the change management piece. So everyone wants to move really quickly. They want to adjust on the cycle times. There's positioning and messaging that's changing. There's experimentation going on with ICP or persona, but none of it's being documented and none of it's being transitioned to the rest of the organization. So as you continue to grow, that knowledge either is lost when that person leaves, or it's never been distributed outside of a select few individuals, which means that the majority of your team's not actually being able or being given the data and the understanding that they need to be able to do their job as effectively as your top performers. So that's the hardest part, right? How do you take that piece of what the top 17% are creating 82, 84% of the revenue? How do you make sure you're taking that and distributing that out to everybody else? It's the hardest thing across the organizations, because when you want to go fast, you go by yourself, and when you want to go far, you go together, right? But how do you sort of marry those two lanes? How do you go quickly and distribute that information in a consistent manner that's effective to a large organization or a scaling organization? It's a big challenge. It's one that we probably get to help with the most.
I think that's really interesting because it goes back to what you said before, Cliff. There's almost this tipping point from, the startup into the kind of scale up, and, the different from a generalist to a specialist, and really kind of documenting what makes us unique and successful, what we've done before, and documenting that so it becomes part of the standard and you communicating it. And it's again really interesting, I think, Cliff. I don't know if you've got a view on this, and that the beauty of startups is that you don't have that legacy, you don't have those silos, but actually the way that we grow is growing into those silos, isn't it?
Yeah. Eventually you end up having to get there, right? Just there's too many jobs to be done, right? That one person can't handle it all. And then you start dividing out and out and out. But the question then becomes, where do those silos sit? Are those silos departmental or are they functional? I think functional makes a lot more sense because you get to have a wider aperture across the business while still maintaining a narrower scope from an individual roles and responsibilities perspective.
Yeah, love it, love it. Thank you so much for that. So, Cliff, if you were on a desert island on your own, what would be the one thing you took with you?
Yeah, you guys asked me this. I can't remember what I wrote down, but I'm gonna say a tarp.
A top. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why?
I imagine if I'm on a desert island, I'm thinking like Robinson Crusoe. There's trees, there's coconuts, there's probably rocks, things that I can fashion into knives, weapons, axes, whatever. But water collection is going to be really important. And I can use that tarp for collecting dew in the morning. I can use that for shelter. Like it's multifaceted. I can keep things dry underneath it. So
Do you know what? The first thing I thought of when you said top was cover, and I'm thinking, well, there's probably leaves and whatever you could, but water collection, that is brilliant, So I think you might survive that, Cliff. Water collection is absolutely key, isn't it? Yeah, wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah. Would you enjoy being on a desert island on your own for an unknown length of time, or would that be the worst case scenario for you?
I wouldn't say that'd be worst case scenario. That'd be really unfortunate. I miss my wife and kids terribly. And I'm an extrovert, so that would be a little tough, but I think I'd be able to manage. Right? I don't think I'd go full Wilson, but yeah, who knows, right? You never know how you react to a situation until you're actually presented with it. So
exactly. And I suppose it also depends on what life stage you're at as well, as to how comfortable you are with these things and whether it's something you really need at that moment. So
I don't know if anyone ever really needs being stuck on a desert island.
But I'm not going full Wilson. Who knows?
Oh man. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. So Cliff, how can listeners get hold of you?
Easiest way to find me is to find me on LinkedIn. I'm the Cliff Simon with a little cloud in front of my name.
Lovely. Thank you so much for being a guest on Scale Your Sales podcast. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Cliff.
Likewise. Thanks for the great questions. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Scale Your Sales podcast. If you like this discussion, feel free to listen to other episodes or watch the captioned show on YouTube and subscribe to future episodes. I would really appreciate it if you would leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you.